The oleic acid makes that mitochondria more functional at the resting level, so it produces more ATPs.
Wow.
And that's good because it triggers less lipolysis, so it becomes more efficient.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Dairy Science Digest. This is a podcast designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to the ears of dairy producers. I'm Reagan Blewell with the University of Missouri Dairy Team, and today's guest is Dr. Andreas Contreras from Michigan State University. And guys, we're in for a treat today because he has his master's, his PhD, and his DVM. And all of these degrees later, he can now focus all of his energy every day in trying to understand how these bovine beasts utilize fat metabolism as fuel to then create milk. So specifically today, we're going to zoom in on the time that we all know is challenging for that cow, early lactation, and the increased energy demands that can send a cow spiraling into metabolic failure. To best understand what's happening to her at the cellular level, we need to determine first in order to best manage her at the farm gate. So, Dr. Contreras, thank you for being here to discuss the results from your featured article titled Oleic Acid Supports Mitochondrial Function During Lipolytic and Pro-Oxidant Challenges in Bovine Adipocytes. That's a mouthful. Welcome to the Dairy Science Digest. Thank you for joining us. Please take a moment to introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, thank you, Regan, for the invitation. My name is Andres Contreras. I'm professor of dairy health and well-being at the College of Vet Med in Michigan State University. And yes, thank you for actually looking into our paper. It's a little bit complex because the complexity of how cows obtain their energy to support lactation during the first week after calving is very difficult to understand. And we focus our research particularly on the use of fatty acids, specifically palmitic and oleic acid. Mm-hmm. I know probably your listeners already use those supplements during the early weeks after parturition, and we were trying to understand how is that those two fatty acids work right at the center of the cell unit that generates energy, which is the mitochondria.
This topic is this one's a little hard, so I think we're gonna do it a little differently than we have in previous editions. I'm gonna take my favorite question that is always at the end of the podcast and bring it to the beginning. So, what would you like boots on the ground dairymen to gather up from this informative project to help us better understand?
Well, two things. One, when you see that your cows are losing a lot of weight, that's telling you that those cows, their metabolic performance might be compromised. Mm-hmm. So when the cow is mobilizing a lot of fat, too much NEFA circulating, those NEFAs are going to impair the function of the mitochondria within the cell. So therefore, they're going to be able to produce less energy per unit of fatty acid that's circulating. Mm-hmm. So if you have cows that are losing too much weight, those cows are not being efficient in their production and utilization of energy. So that's one key thing. So we have to be very vigilant on those cows that lose a lot of weight. Second, the more fat the cows have, the more fat they're going to mobilize. Mm-hmm. So if you have cows that are over-conditioned, that are, going to the fatty side, those cows are going to mobilize more free fatty acids in the first weeks after calving. So in those cows, all this story that we're talking about of production of ROSs and the mitochondria being less effective in producing energy is going to magnify several times. Mm-hmm. And that's why those cows are the ones that we see crashing in the first weeks after calving. So watch out for cows that are mobilizing too much fat. Be especially careful with cows that are overweight, that are going to calve over condition.
Yes, yeah. And so I know several listeners have probably been several years since we've been in biology. Can we start there at the mitochondrial level and kind of remind us about this engine fueling life?
So the mitochondria is an organelle of all the cells. And in that organelle is where the magic happens. So it's where the cell uses the substrates such as fatty acids, carbohydrates, and sometimes proteins, so amino acids, to generate ATPs that fuel the function of the different tissues. That's where everything happens.
It's where the magic happens, like you said. And so
Exactly.
that engine is driving forward and throwing out ATP, which is our units of energy. And what we've learned, what we've seen in the barn, we have watched oleic and palmitic acids functioning to help our transition dairy cows. And it's going to be in a lot of transition cow rations currently. But you're just trying to understand how. How is that happening? Why is that helping? And what observations can be explained by the addition of these fatty acids into the ration, right?
Exactly. So the approach to this paper, how we designed this study, was to, first of all, trying to understand what happens to the mitochondria when we are challenging this organelle with vast energy demands. Because cows are eating less and are producing a lot of milk, so it requires a lot of energy. And the second thing that we wanted to understand is what happens when cows enter oxidative stress, because they're generating all that energy. At the same time, they produce a lot of reactive oxygen species that can actually harm the cell membrane and the mitochondrial membrane and disrupt the function. So those were the first two questions that we wanted to address.
And so I kind of wanted to narrow this scope down when I was thinking at it, and correct me if I'm being too simplistic. I was thinking about the mitochondria of that cow in first week of lactation. It really has two paths. You could have efficient mitochondrial function where respiration is going to be sustaining that energy production and contributing to the maintenance of keeping oxidative damage at bay. So oxidative damage is going to be part of that inflammation response and that we know harms cows. So she could either be doing this well, having an efficient mitochondrial function, or we can go down the other path of inefficiency, where that mitochondrial function is dysregulated. And that throws off oxidative stress. And these oxidants are called reactive oxidative species. Sometimes we refer to them as ROS. And so that oxidative stress at a cellular level is kind of chewing away at the cow. And it's really challenging her immune system. Is that correct?
Exactly. So in this study, what we show is that when cows start to mobilize fat, so that's the fat mobilization we call.
Those NEFAs.
Yes, it actually induces a very transient dysfunction of the mitochondria. Usually, because we did this in vitro, so we took the cells from the cows and we exposed them to an environment that was similar to what cows experience right after calving.
Stress.
So high NEFAs and high concentrations of ROS. So what we found is that when we induce this lipolysis or the fat breakdown in this particular fat cells, the mitochondria starts to suffer. However, that stress is transient. So we expose these cells for about 3 hours to this fat breakdown challenge. And what we found is that they recover after the 3 hours period. But what happens in the cows that don't do well in the transition period is that they continue
to spiral,
having this fat breakdown, and that really becomes a vicious circle where more lipolysis induces more mitochondrial dysfunction, and then the cow never really recovers from stress that this fat breakdown produces in the mitochondria. And that's why you see that some of those cows lose a lot of weight, but they don't do well in the first weeks after calving.
Sure. And while we acknowledge that it's necessary, this lipolysis, to gather up energy. That's just a fancy word for mobilizing fat from her body condition into her liver to be utilized for milk production. We know that's needed, but when it's excessive and prolonged, then it overloads the metabolic pathway, and that's what starts to get this inflammation response that we see her then have insulin responses, and so she chooses not to eat, and that's going to be your target problem. That's going to be your problem cow. And so while most editions of this podcast we go through and we really comb out each individual treatment and data, the treatments here is really you've cut out a piece of fat from bovines and you've put it on a cell dish, and then you stressed out this little piece of fat to mobilize this mitochondrial response. So I don't know that we're probably going to go into a lot of treatment discussion in this particular discussion, but please know that, guys, in the show notes, this paper is definitely got a clickable link, and you should check out the colorful graphs showing exactly what Doc's talking about, where throughout the challenge, you can see that mitochondrial response that is discussing the impacts of these fatty acids. So how did you test oleic and palmitic acids and their effect at the mitochondrial fat cell level?
But what we did is that we supplemented these fat cells for a number of days, 7, and then we challenged those cells with a fat mobilization challenge or an ROS challenge, oxidative stress. And what we found was, first of all, that when you challenge these fat cells with fat mobilization, with inducing lipolysis or fat breakdown, they have a transient state where their mitochondria suffers and becomes dysfunctional. Mm-hmm. But then after about 3 hours, it recovers its function. However, when we included oleic acid, the oleic acid made the fat cells more resistant to the challenge. And it also made the fat cells more resistant to the oxidative stress challenge.
That's cool.
And this is a way of us to finding out what's the mechanism that the oleic acid and the palmitic acid supplementation uses in the cow. So what we're seeing here is that at least the positive responses that we see when we feed cows these supplements might be related to how they improve how the mitochondria functions in their fat tissue. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because they become more efficient, so they generate more energy, more ATPs for milk production, and at the same time, they are more resistant to oxidative stress.
Yeah, and let me be real frank and honest. When I was reading through the paper, I saw that oleic acids increased the basal respiration at the mitochondrial level. But what does that even mean? What's a mitochondria respirating mean?
So we measure the 2 types of respiration in this little machine that is called the Seahorse XF. So in that little machine, we're able to test how is that the cell functions metabolically. So how it uses oxygen and how it generates ATP when we have a substrate or when we don't have a substrate. So, and by a substrate, I mean a carbohydrate or a fat. So the basal respiration indicates that mitochondria is producing ATP without being provided a substrate. So it's just using the energy that they have in the cell. What this is telling us is that the oleic acid makes that mitochondria more functional at the resting level, so it produces more ATPs.
Wow.
And that's good because it triggers less
lipolysis,
right? So it becomes more efficient.
Yes. Wow. Okay, so just to kind of reiterate that, the oleic acids not only improved kind of the efficiency of that mitochondria by being able to generate more units of energy per unit of substrate, but guys, that ATP production increased statistically different when oleic acids were in the equation. Right? So that means that the cow is going to feel more fueled. And if she feels more fueled, that's going to slow down the process of her taking fat off of her body to then turn it into milk. And that's a good thing, right? Because that tells her that she's got what she needs sitting in front of her at the feed bunk, because you provide that to her. And that tells her body to sustain itself without mobilizing the fat, but rather to sustain itself using the resources in front of her. That, oh man, what a spiral of events that could happen if we could just get her right those first 3 days. If we can fix the problem of non-esterified fatty acids spiraling out of control the first 3 days, then she will be more successful the next 302 days, right?
Exactly. Nicely summarized. Yeah.
Boy, if that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what is, right? That's very, very awesome. Okay, and so another thing that I thought was interesting, kind of a discussion about redox. And so I read about redox in some of the literature, but I guess I never really had read it quite like you had it phrased in your article, and it really helped me understand the immune system provides antioxidants, right? We hear about the immune system and antioxidants. And then we just got done talking about how when she's mobilizing fat, it generates oxidants or oxidative damage, right? Because she's using these fats in that way. So redox is the way the body is relating to the ratio of bad oxidants to good antioxidants being provided by the immune system. Can you speak to oleic acids or palmitic acids and their ability to help with this redox balance?
Yeah, so one thing that's important to note is that the reactive oxygen species, or pro-oxidants as you call it, they're generated by the immune cells and also by the fat cells, because production of ATP would always generate,
Throw off.
a byproduct of respiration might include these reactive oxygen species, or
Yes.
ROS. So what the cell does to counteract that continuous release of these ROSs is to have antioxidants, right? And those neutralize those ROS that are generated. In this study, we found that lipolysis, or fat breakdown, induces the production of these ROS. And that, coupled with the mitochondrial respiration, might overwhelm the fat cell in this case with a lot of ROSs. And what we found is that when you have oleic acid in place as part of the fat containing the fat cells, when you supplement the cow with oleic acid, that actually helps the cell to control the production of those ROSs and actually improves its resistance to oxidative stress. So that's one of the key functions of oleic acid in this challenge, as you might call it, during the transition period within
Awesome.
the fat cell.
So if you see a cohort of cows that are coming on like this, or even if it's just in your operations, do you think it would be best management practices based on this cellular data to introduce oleic acids and or palmitic blends to that transition cow ration?
Exactly, yes. That's when you start to think about solutions. And one possible solution is the supplementation of oleic acid or oleic acid and palmitic acid blends. The things with oleic acid is, as we show here in this study, is that it might help you stabilize the mitochondria. So it becomes more efficient in generating ATP, so energy for milk production. And at the same time, it might protect the fat from oxidative stress. So the fat will work better and will help the cow generate the energy that she needs. The second thing is that oleic acid also promotes the formation of this, we call it lipid droplets. So that's where the fat cell stores the fatty acids. So oleic acid has the benefit of inducing the formation of these new lipid droplets. And what that does is that it actually isolates the fatty acids from being used by other cells or overflow the blood with more NEFAs. Those are NEFAs. So NEFAs, instead of going out into circulation to overwhelm the liver, what they will do is to be stored in the fat cell, and therefore there will be less NEFAs floating around. What that will do is that will improve dry matter intake, because remember, when cows have high NEFAs, they tend to eat less just because they think that they have too much energy circulating.
Yeah.
And at the same time, obviously, as I said before, the oleic acid improves the mitochondrial function and therefore generates more energy and less reactive Alzheimer species. So those are the two important things that we show in this paper, and how that works within the fat cell.
Because I think that we've seen these fatty acids work pretty well in the transition ration, and I really applaud you guys for finding the reason why. Like, we need to understand why, so that we're chasing the right rabbit down the right hole. And any opportunity that I ever have to promote a little bit of University of Missouri data, there was some data generated long ago looking at day 3 NEFAs being positively correlated to success or failure of first service and reproduction. So here we're hyper focused on that first week of production, but guys, that has lasting implications, and you know it, right? The data suggests that if she's got this spiraling out of control NEFA in her blood day 3, she's not going to breed back 60 days later, and so it's just all the more reason to help make sure that we're taking the time to fuel this beast with exactly what she needs to equip her to be successful through this very challenging window. Well, Andreas, this has been a great discussion. I thank you so much for your time and willingness to really hack away at this challenging topic, because investigating that cellular level of energy that fuels the beautiful beast is so important. And the more we understand, the better we can equip her for success through nutrition. And listeners, I applaud you for taking time out of your day to gather up sound science that you'll ultimately be able to base your management decisions around. I've really enjoyed this discussion and learned a lot from our conversation. This has been the August edition of the Dairy Science Digest, which is a monthly podcast project designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to your ears. Highlighting peer-reviewed research articles that are actively in press, it is provided to you by your University of Missouri Dairy team. So please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to get future editions straight to your cell phone. This is Reagan Blue with the Dairy Science Digest, and I hope you have a great day.